The faint glow of the hallway light spilled into the room as Grace stopped in the doorway, her heart racing. Ethan was sitting idly against the desk, staring at her with his piercing gaze. He muttered, his voice strained, "I know we're supposed to act like family. But I can no longer pretend." Her breath caught as he stepped closer, the tension between them exploding in the air. Grace's mother assumed it would be easy to adjust when she remarried and brought Ethan into their lives. Only a year older than her, he was her new stepbrother and had an easy charisma that attracted everyone. Grace first attributed her knowledge of his presence to the excitement of welcoming a new family member into the family. But as the months went by, she was unable to ignore how he made her feel. She was drawn to Ethan because of his calm intensity, which went beyond his physical attractiveness. Long after they had interacted, she could still think about the way he laughed and moved. Grace made an effort to dismiss it, telling herself it was just a fleeting romantic interest. However, in the quiet times when no one else was present, the tension between them just appeared to increase. Grace and Ethan were left alone at home one evening when their parents made the decision to go out to supper. The charged energy that seemed to buzz between them seemed to be amplified by the unusually quiet surroundings. Grace entered the room with a bowl of popcorn while Ethan was in the living room, changing the stations. She sat down on the other end of the couch and said, in a cheerful tone, "Anything good on?" He looked at her with a little smile and shrugged. "Not at all. You choose?" She grabbed the remote, scrolling aimlessly through the options. But she couldn't focus, her mind too preoccupied with the weight of his presence beside her. As the night wore on, they ended up talking instead of watching TV. Their conversation meandered from school to their parents' quirks, but Grace couldn't help noticing how Ethan's gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. "You've changed," he said suddenly, his voice soft. She frowned, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. You're different, more confident. It's nice." Grace's cheeks flushed as she looked away, her heart fluttering. "Thanks, I guess." He leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. "It's not just that. You're hard to ignore, Grace." Her breath caught, the words hanging heavily in the air. "Ethan, we're family now," she said, her voice trembling. He let out a soft laugh, his tone laced with frustration. "Are we? Because it doesn't feel like it." Grace stood, trying to escape the tension that had settled between them. "I think I'm going to head to bed," she said quickly, grabbing the empty popcorn bowl. "Grace," Ethan called after her, his voice steady. She paused in the doorway, her back to him. "What?" "Don't run away from this," he said, standing. "From us." Her pulse quickened as she turned to face him. "Ethan, there is no us. It's not right." He took a step closer, his gaze locked on hers. "Maybe not, but tell me you don't feel it too." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she stood frozen as he closed the distance between them, his hand brushing hers. The air between them was electric as Ethan reached out, his fingers lightly tracing the curve of her jaw. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice low and filled with emotion. Grace's heart pounded as she searched his eyes, her own emotions warring within her. But instead of pushing him away, she leaned into his touch, her breath hitching as their lips met. The kiss was hesitant at first, but it quickly deepened, their restraint crumbling under the weight of everything they'd been holding back. Ethan's hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer as Grace's fingers tangled in his hair. "You're impossible," she murmured against his lips, her voice trembling. "And you're intoxicating," he replied, his tone thick with desire. The living room became their sanctuary, the quiet house shielding them as they gave in to the connection they could no longer deny. Grace woke to the soft light of dawn streaming through her curtains. Her chest tightened as the events of the night before came rushing back. She sat up, running a hand through her hair as her door creaked open. Ethan stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of worry and determination. "We need to talk," he said softly. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Before they could say more, their parents' laughter echoed from downstairs. "Morning, you two," their mom called. "Breakfast is ready." Panic flickered across Grace's face as Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "Don't worry," he murmured. We'll figure this out. Grace's heart raced as she followed him downstairs, their parents oblivious to the secret that hung between them. And as the day unfolded, one thought lingered in her mind. They'd crossed a line they could never come back from, and the consequences were only just beginning. The weight of their secret grew heavier with each passing day. Every shared glance between Grace and Ethan felt like a thunderclap, a constant reminder of the line they had crossed. Their parents were none the wiser, blissfully caught up in their newly blended family's routines. But for Grace and Ethan, the tension was unbearable. Grace found herself avoiding Ethan whenever possible, afraid that even a moment alone with him would reignite the fire they had barely managed to contain. But avoidance only made things worse, the charged silence between them growing louder with every stolen glance and unspoken word. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't seem content to let things lie. He found ways to linger near her, a hand brushing hers as they passed in the hallway, his gaze lingering on hers during dinner, and moments when he would catch her off guard with whispered words that left her breathless. One evening, after their parents went out for a date night, Grace retreated to her room, hoping for some solitude. She was scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself, when a soft knock at the door startled her. "Grace, it's me," Ethan said, his voice low. She hesitated, her heart pounding. "What do you want, Ethan?" "We need to talk," he replied. Reluctantly, she opened the door. Ethan stepped inside, closing it quietly behind him. He looked at her, his expression a mix of frustration and longing. "This can't keep going like this," he said. Grace crossed her arms, her voice sharp despite her trembling hands. "What do you expect me to do, Ethan? Pretend it never happened? Pretend I don't feel like I'm losing my mind every time I see you?" He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers. "I don't want you to pretend. I want you to admit that what we have isn't something we can just ignore." Her breath hitched as his words sank in. "Ethan, this is wrong. We're family. Are we?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "We're only step-siblings because of them. That doesn't change how I feel about you, Grace." The room grew silent, the tension between them suffocating. Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he whispered. Grace closed her eyes, her resolve crumbling. "I can't," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Ethan cupped her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "Then stop running from it," he murmured. Before she could respond, his lips found hers in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, filled with all the emotions they had been trying to suppress. Grace melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as their connection deepened. "You're impossible," she murmured against his lips, her voice trembling. "And you're unforgettable," he replied, his hands sliding to her waist. Their moment was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Panic shot through Grace as she pulled away, her heart racing. "Mom and Dad are back," she whispered, her voice filled with alarm. Ethan straightened, his expression calm but determined. "Go downstairs," he said softly. "Act normal. I'll follow in a minute." Grace hesitated, but nodded, her stomach churning as she made her way to the living room. Her mom greeted her with a bright smile, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "How was your night?" her mom asked, setting her purse on the counter. "Fine," Grace replied, forcing a smile. Moments later, Ethan joined them, his expression relaxed as he leaned against the doorway. "Hey," he said casually, "you two have a good time?" Their parents laughed, launching into a story about their evening. But as Grace listened, her mind raced, the weight of what had happened pressing heavily on her. As the days passed, Grace and Ethan's secret became harder to hide. The stolen moments, the lingering touches, it was only a matter of time before someone noticed, and while they both knew the risks, neither could bring themselves to let go. One evening, as Grace sat alone in her room, Ethan appeared at the doorway, his expression serious. "This can't keep going like this," he said, stepping inside. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I mean, we need to figure out what we're doing," he said, his tone steady, "because I can't keep pretending I'm okay with just hiding this." Grace's chest tightened as she looked at him, her emotions warring within her. "Ethan, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you," he said simply, "and I don't care what anyone else thinks." Grace stared at him, her heart pounding as his words sank in. She knew the road ahead would be messy, complicated, and filled with challenges. But as Ethan reached for her hand, his grip steady and sure, she felt a flicker of hope. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Grace stared at Ethan, her heart pounding as the weight of his words settled over her. "I'm saying I want you," he repeated, his voice firm but filled with vulnerability. "And I don't care what anyone else thinks." Her breath caught, her mind racing. "Ethan, this is too much," she whispered. Though the tremble in her voice betrayed her resolve, he stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "I've tried to ignore this, to push it away, but it's impossible, Grace. You know it as much as I do." Grace's pulse quickened as his words sank in. "This isn't fair," she murmured, her voice trembling. "No, it's not," he admitted, his gaze locking onto hers. "But that doesn't make it any less real." Before she could respond, Ethan leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, filled with the intensity of everything they'd been holding back. Grace froze for a moment, her mind screaming at her to stop, but the warmth of his touch and the sheer weight of their connection melted her resistance. The kiss deepened, their restraint dissolving as weeks of tension and unspoken feelings erupted in a whirlwind of passion. Ethan's hands slid to her waist, pulling her closer as Grace's fingers tangled in his hair. "You're impossible," she murmured against his lips, her voice trembling with a mix of frustration and desire. "And you're irresistible," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The room became their sanctuary, the rest of the world fading away as they gave in to the pull between them. Ethan guided her gently to the bed, his movements both confident and tender, as if he couldn't believe this moment was real. Just as their passion reached its peak, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Grace's eyes widened in panic as she pushed Ethan away, her heart racing. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan stood quickly, his expression shifting from longing to alarm. The door creaked open, and their mom's voice called out, "Grace, are you still awake?" She appeared in the doorway, her gaze flicking between them. For a moment, her expression was neutral, but as she noticed the disheveled state of the room and the tension in the air, her brow furrowed. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Grace scrambled to compose herself, her mind racing for an explanation. "We were just talking," she said, her voice faltering. Their mom's eyes narrowed, her gaze settling on Ethan. "Talking? At this hour?" Ethan stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "It's not what you think," he said, though his words did little to ease her suspicion. Their mom stood silent for a moment, her expression unreadable, before finally sighing. "I don't know what's going on, but I'll say this. Whatever it is, it ends now. Do you hear me?" Grace nodded quickly, her cheeks flushing with guilt and embarrassment. Ethan gave a curt nod, his jaw tightening as their mom turned and left the room. The next morning, the house was quiet, the tension from the previous night hanging heavy in the air. Grace avoided Ethan's gaze at breakfast, her mind replaying the events over and over. As their mom bustled about the kitchen, her cheerful demeanor starkly contrasting the unease in the room, Ethan finally broke the silence. "We need to talk," he said softly, his voice meant only for Grace. She glanced at him, her chest tightening. "Not now," she whispered, her tone pleading. "Soon," he insisted, his gaze steady. Grace nodded, her heart heavy. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. They couldn't undo what had happened, and the road ahead would be anything but simple.